there are these hallucinations which are very small, very tiny, you don't come to know. But then when you have a multi-agent system, it compounds. And this compounding hallucination to me is my nightmare.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of AGI, where we deep dive into all things AI. And today I'm very excited to have Aakriti with us. She is the VP of AI Engineering at Revionics and leading Dynamics global teams spanning from US, India, and UK, and has been an influential voice in AI leadership. Aakriti, very grateful to have you over here. Welcome to the show. Have very, good and conversation forward. I cannot wait to go over those questions. Please share a bit about yourself and your journey.
Yeah, sure. That's great. You gave a pretty big introduction. I was going to say that was going to be my introduction, so it's one of my lines. But yeah, so I've been in the AI data engineering space for about 10 to 12 years now. I did my engineering from India. Was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, and ended up in the US to do my master's from Carnegie Mellon. And so during that journey, I kind of entered into the data science, machine learning space, and now AI, right? And so I've just, I started off as a analyst and then a full stack data scientist, and I've always been in an engineer by nature, and that's basically what's helped me kind of even grow. So I started with that, and then I started leading my data science team, and from there I then took on, I joined my current company, which is Revionics, and I started leading the entire engineering organization. And so I've been doing that for about, I think, 3 years now, where we have multiple teams. And Revionics is a very AI focused company, right? We do AI powered pricing. And so we have obviously applications that are built around it, but at the end of the day, it is a pure, I would say, AI, company. So yeah, that's me. So happy to answer any questions that you have around, how I think of AI from a traditional standpoint and now with Gen AI. So
Yeah, yeah. I think you have a very interesting, journey arc from engineering from India, CMU, now in leadership throughout like three continents. I just love these non-linear stories where where your talent makes you, so now you're VP of AI. So how do you, maybe give a bit about those things? So how you were able to transition from engineering to leadership, and maybe how do we see those early signs, right? And what can make us help to prepare for those things?
yeah. I'll talk to you a little bit about, my journey. So I started off as an engineer, like everyone does in India, right? You can either be a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. I decided to be an engineer. And after that, I was just like, okay, what do I do, right? Because I think now, having my teams in India, etc., engineering in India is like really evolved and it's become really good, right? And I love where India is going with it. But when I graduated, it wasn't that, right? I didn't want to do like a normal software development job. And so I took a gap year. Pretty sure my parents at the back were just like, what is she doing? But, I was just like, hey, man, I don't know what I'm going to do, right? And it's during that time when I realized, and, it's not common for people to take gap years in India. You get a lot of pressure, right? So I was just like, hey, I'm going to figure this out. And I ended up thinking like I liked math. I always have liked math and I like engineering. And I was just like, hey, what is a, what can I do with both of them? And that's how, data science, ML was like really booming at that point in time. And, I wanted to do my master's and hence I ended up going to Carnegie Mellon. Since then, I think it's just been I am a curious person. I like to learn. And so as a part of that, I ended up being, I started as an analyst, which was a data science analyst. I realized like I'm building a lot of stuff, but it isn't going into production. Like, and I'm the kind of person who wants to see out what I'm building. And I'm just like, what do I need to do, man? And so ended up going into full stack data scientist role. And since then, I was building, I was like having a lot of thing on architecture, and I realized like this is what I like to do. And I'm a player coach, right? I don't, if someone told me do just management, I would not be able to do that. I'll be very honest, right? Even right now in my company, I don't know if my engineers like it, but I am involved in a sense that I am passionate about architecture. I like what people are working. I like problem solving, right? I like challenging problems. Is why I'm at this company. And so I think that was just my natural way of like kind of getting more and more closer to the tech, solving these problems. And I ended up going into management because that was the need of the hour at that point in time, right? And I realized that it's actually a lot of fun if you're doing both, because I can have the influence on what, the way I want to kind of run a team, build a product and then run, an entire organization. And that's just honestly been my journey. I think the other thing that's really helped me is a smaller organization. I always go for a smaller organization. Now, whether that's going to be true 5 to 10 years down the line, I don't know. But I've learned a lot. Going to smaller organizations, I've always been kind of exposed to a lot, right? And as I get exposed to this, I just realized that I wanted to learn, maybe I wanted to know how marketing works with this, right? Product, all of this, right? And so, like, I think the small company that I worked with also helped me kind of be more, general and deep at the same time, if that makes sense. So
Yeah. I think kind of, so is it true like so like working in a small, or it might give you a lot of more exposure and kind of prepare, as you're saying, prepare for that problem, solving mind in or attitude, I would say, right? So you have that problem solving attitude, or you know what, I want to get this done. This is a problem, and technology is kind of like an instrument. Then it's like that, right?
it's problem
Yeah,
solving is always been at the core, right? I think technology, you can just figure out, hey, how am I going to use this? And
yeah,
it's right. But I do think that was at the core of it, and the exposure that I got, right? I was just like, I'm a very inquisitive person. I ask a lot of questions, and people are like, okay, can we please stop? And so I think that also helped me, where I was just like, okay, why are we doing it? Why are we not doing it this way? Right. And there were lots of things I didn't know going in, right? So I mean, Spark and all of that. It all was something that I learned on the job, but it was not hard because at the end of the day, you were trying to solve a problem. So yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah, I can see a problem solver in you a lot.
Really? Okay.
That one, yeah.
And sometimes too much. I mean, maybe over engineer sometimes, but yeah.
Oh, great. I think you're in one of the currently most interesting space in AI, application, which has kind of like the biggest impact in day-to-day life. For example, pricing, right? So you guys decide what maybe the pricing can have for a retailer, what is the best pricing for it. Uh, I think AI taking that decision is for me, kind of mind-boggling because and kind of predicting, okay, you know what, and such so many factors, and the risk is so high. So what if you know, uh, decide to predict something wrong and it just maybe the whole economy can go blast, right? Maybe for a small thing. So in those scenarios, as I think you mentioned as one of the things as you'd love to get those things into production, right? So for this, how do you get that in production, right, and make that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, so when you think about it, and I'll be very honest, like AI needs guardrails around it, right? And we need to, and maybe that might not be a thing a few years from now, but at least right now, to be able to build trust, to be able to have people adopt it, right? If you're gonna build something and someone doesn't adopt it, why are you building it, right? At the end of the day. And so to be able to do those things, you have to have this concept of guardrails, right? And that's basically what we do from a Revionics standpoint, right? So we model demand, and I'll talk about, like, we go from, like, we look at inflation, we look at seasonality, we look at, we look at a lot of different things, holidays, effect, we look at indirect impacts like cannibalization, affinity, and, we come up with like what we think the demand would be, right? And then we use that as a part to kind of optimize the prices. But the reason why I say that, why I separate that out, is when we're optimizing prices, that's when we get business rules into our context, right? And that's what allows for the guardrails, right? Because we need that. And, I'm talking about this from a AI perspective. There's a lot more that happens from an application UI perspective, right? But this is required so that, like you said, AI makes mistakes, and that is a fact, right? And if you have bad data, it's going to give you a bad output. It's always been the case, right? And so how do you be defensive in the way you're actually sending out recommendations? So I think guardrails and how you apply that within your AI application is key. Right? We've made it flexible enough where we've tried to kind of have these rules be something people can see in terms of the weightage they want to give it, et cetera, which helps them kind of come get to a step by step of how did I get to this price recommendation, right? So that's one way, right? And then from a UI perspective, I think we want to be able to show um, just the actual effect of everything, right? Like someone be like, okay, tariffs is a big thing right now. How do we deal with tariffs, right? Is that a business rule, etc.? And we've had a lot of experience over the past 20 years to kind of help people navigate. But I do think guardrails is one thing, right? And then there's the second thing around UI, and then the third thing is like the application that you're building, right? You have to have training pipelines and evaluation pipelines and monitoring, internal monitoring, right? We wouldn't do this from an if we weren't internally monitoring kind of like, what it has the elasticity shifted, is there sales volatility, stuff like that. So there is like, so when I say AI application, everyone's like, oh my God, what do you do from a model perspective? But there's so much more than that. Honestly, how you're architecting the application, how do you let human input into your application in a way that you can kind of bring those guardrails in, right? So
Oh, great. I can see you have like now PhD into it, kind of, and know all the things. Right.
yeah, it's
That's
learning.
great.
Yeah, I mean, I try, but I think the other thing is just being surrounded by a really smart team really helps, right? Like just being able to talk and brainstorm. I think if I had it,
Yeah.
not one person can always get to the right solution. I always believe that it is a brainstorming thing, and so it is like what team you have, how are you all kind of also approaching the problems, right? How do you kind of think about architecture, POC? I'm a big believer in POCs. You prove and then you take it to production. I understand that engineering considerations is different from a POC to that, but that's fine, right? You're proving out a concept and then you're coming up with like, hey, what is the scalable architecture going to be? So
Yeah. Yes, I think that's very fascinating, and you gave a lot of insights. So I was also working on not on price, maybe demand, and few other things that you said. For example, having seasonalities, and having holidays, built into it. Kind of that is that is like more of modeling parameters. But how do you, add, let's say, business parameters or business outcomes that might affect your, models as well, and the whole company itself, right? So how do you care about that?
yeah, I think that's a good point, right? So let's talk about just pricing in general, right? When we're going to a client, our clients can be grocers, DIY, convenience, whatever, right? And you're not going to be like they can't A/B test prices. They're not going to be like, hey, this portion of products within this store is going to get Revionics prices, and this is not right because A/B testing is not a thing. Yeah, sure, people could do some kind of offline testing where they say I'm going to take a set of prices in one store and maybe another store, but again, that depends on the retailer, right? And so it's definitely a thing that we've had to think about, right? So we obviously there is, forecast accuracy. There are all of these things we do from a modeling standpoint. But when we start doing optimization, how do you take business outcomes, right? I think a big part of it is these business rules that we input, right? It doesn't only provide you guardrails, but it also provides you direction of where, you should go. The second one is we also provide, and I mean, this is not related to business outcomes, but in a way where we provide confidence around our recommendations, which is we're telling you how confident we are,
Mm,
i.e., should we be giving you an aggressive price change? Should we not? Right? And you can see the confidence to feel more confident about whether you should take it
yeah,
or not. Right. And I think the third one, which is the business outcomes, which I think is very important, is we've had to develop a internal kind of like value measurement technique, right? Which is if you took our prices, this would be the forecasted impact, etc. And the B is the other variant that you're testing is, hey, if you hadn't taken any price changes, if you hadn't looked at our model, what would be the forecasted profit, revenue, etc. Right? So we have to do
mm,
that offline testing to be able to get people to understand our value. I would say it's not always straightforward, right? There are a lot of, people can be like, how do you come up with the baseline, right? The
yeah,
baseline can that it depends. And so we definitely have that challenge. It's easier with online testing where you can just show the value. You could do A/B testing and be just like, hey, you could see the lift in profit that you got, right? I used to work in a B2C company before I moved here. It was very easy. We used to always have a 5% traffic that we used to dedicate to just be able to do these tests, right? And so we've definitely had to build these things offline where we can then help our customers kind of tie it to business outcome because we always look at model outputs, which is, forecasts, how that affects, all our parameters, elasticity, how that affects our prices. And then from the prices, what is the forecasted impact, basically. So if you've made a
yeah.
change in price, this is what your forecasted profit revenue, etc. will be.
Awesome. So I think I was talking to someone in loan recovery. I think that's a very separate thing, but and they were doing, you know what we did is we kind of trained something called reinforcement learning algorithms, kind of because we had like less data. For example, for a few of your stores which are newly opened, which just have, let's say, right, a less data sparsity and seasonality, and that kind of helped us get what effects might be there if you do, pull some levers. So very curious if you guys have tried like let's simulating
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
some scenarios.
Yeah. So we have a lot of actually simulation even within our tool. We let our customers do these what if
Oh,
scenarios,
awesome.
let them simulate, right? So we do optimization. So from a couple of products, we're like helping them figure out what are the best offer terms. But within our tool, we give these simulation like, hey, if you change your price from this to this, what is the impacted change? What is your forecast, etc. So that helps get people kind of onto the thing. But like, when you talk about the different effects, right? We at the end of the day use a non-black box model. We've built the models from scratch, right? We use, and then we have an output of the statistical parameters, which we express in a way where we can get a percent of lift, right? So it is easy for us to show to the user, this is your affinity lift, this is your seasonality lift, et cetera, which also helps from that perspective. And then, when we talk about, data sparsity, etc., I do think so. I don't think I've talked about this, but I do think building everything in terms of pillars makes a lot of sense, right? So when we think of our AI platform, we think of three different things, right? One is accuracy. How can we get more accurate? So sparsity, equal linearity, all of that becomes a thing, right? How are we building? Are we doing a hierarchical model? Are we not? Can we kind of like fall back on something else to be able to get like the cold start problem, etc., right? New product problem. And the second one is scalability, right? Um, I think people underestimate the scalability. Like we at some run 500,000 models for one client at one point in time, right? And we do a lot of small models. We don't run big models. And so we have to build out products to be scalable. And, yes, using the GCPs and the AWS of the world is great, but you have to have your own customized smart kind of techniques on top of that to be able to be more scalable. And I think the third one I is super important. And I'm thinking all of this I'm talking about from a predictive AI standpoint. I have an entire set of other things that I think about from an agentic AI, which I'll talk to you about. But from a from an extensibility standpoint, right? You said seasonality. So 1 year ago we were talking about inflation. Now we're talking about tariffs, right? How do you keep up with the market changes? How are you making it easy keep updating your models, right? Because every client, every person, every user is going to have some nuance, right? And so you're building a system that you can add to very quickly and take features out to market, which means that you have to have all of the ecosystem around it. How are you testing it out? How are you going to monitor it? All of that. How are you going to deploy it quickly, right? So those things, that's how I think about predictive AI, which also helps kind of one take things to production but also kind of make sure that we aren't these big AI solutions that we're trying to get out, which you said can have a pretty big impact on a user kind of taking in some of these recommendations. So yeah,
I think
I
one
hope
of the
this is,
things that
I know I talk about it a
yeah.
lot, but yeah.
No. It's quite fascinating. I've also been learning a lot of things. I think one of the things that you mentioned tariffs, right? Uh, how do you model something which you don't have the data for?
Yeah, I mean, so
Right.
from a tariff standpoint, it isn't so I like to tell people that modeling doesn't have to. So when I think of an AI platform, it's not just modeling, right? It is also optimization and it is the business rules, right? So for tariffs, I said that as a feature, but that's not a feature that we would put into our model, right? Because like you said, we don't have data. Yeah, eventually when you have data, we could do that. But I think it's two things. One, we do a POC if we have data and actually prove out the value of it or not, like we did that for inflation, etc. And I think the second one is, so actually the two things. One is how are we putting that as a part of our business rules? So we have some concepts or some tools within our application to help people be able to do, private label gaps better, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we do that? Right. And I think the third one is we just have a lot of expertise when it comes to pricing within our organization. conversation. So you're just talking to the client to kind of
You
help.
guys know the best already.
No, I'm saying that,
Yeah.
but I just feel like there are ways to get around it. It's not like you can have, okay, it's a new thing, right? So it's not like we're going to be like, okay, we know exactly what the right answer is, but it's about practices and actual things we know that we can help our clients with, basically. So that's a very valid question. I think it depends on the feature. I say tariffs because that's very kind of, relevant right now, but we've had ton of questions from about tariffs from our clients, right? So it's like, how are you navigating them? How are you helping with those best practices, basically?
Very fascinating. Since we were talking about more about traditional ML, let's talk about now agentic AI and everything. So how is Ravionics seeing it? Are you guys having some shift towards using more agentic AI systems, or how are you looking in general with these agentic AI systems?
Yeah. I mean, so we're building an agent right now, right? So we've historically always done AI pricing, which is great. And, that is gives people a lot of value from the actual outputs, right? The actual price recommendations. I view agentic and Gen AI as a way to elevate our predictive AI. It is more in terms of, how are you giving the user a better experience? Are you making pricing accessible outside the pricing team, right? Those are things where Gen AI is going to help with adoption, right? We're saying that, hey, we want a user to be in our tool. So let me kind of talk about what we've done, right? So 2.5 years ago, I think now, we came out with our first RAG bot, right? Everyone was like, hey, we wanted to just try it out. Everyone was talking about LLMs. We wanted to kind of see what value we can give to our clients. And we have really big user guides. And so we decided to kind of build out a RAG bot, which helps people just ask it in natural language, right? It was good because it helped us build out our pipelines basically for a lot of our Gen AI experiences. Then we went into conversational analytics, which was, hey, let's talk text to SQL, right? Why don't you ask a question? Hey, which of my products were priced higher than my competitors in the last week? Instead of going into 5 different dashboards to understand that, we're helping you with just, within our tool, just ask that in natural language, right? So that was more from a, RAG bot to a specialized bot, which was good, but it wasn't taking actions. It wasn't like taking a big problem and breaking it down. Pricing agent, right? We did an alpha release in April, and now we're kind of taking it into production. But the main challenges are, reliability, modularity, and I'll talk about multi agents, in a bit. But I think for us, it is, how does it, a user can come to our tool and ask this, right? They're like, hey, I want to see all the products that were priced higher than my competitors. Find this data for me. Now, in this data, change my prices, reduce them, and show me the impact so I can figure out if I want to do it. Instead of going within the tool and looking it at an item level, you can just ask this question. So, what the agent would do is it takes that, it breaks it up into with reasons as to which tool should I call, what are the other agents that I call. It goes and gets the data using, our data agent. And then it would go and kind of figure out, okay, now I need to forecast, now I need to apply these rules, etc., etc. So the point is that the way we're looking at it is improving our user experience, right? Helping our users today scale, right? Merchandising and pricing teams is small. So we're helping them kind of do a lot more in a less amount of time, right? And then I think the third one is quick data insights. So making like operationally more efficient, right? And then obviously for us, it is, better user experience, more adoption because we're helping a user kind of stay within our tool instead of maybe they go to use Excel for something, right? And so increased adoption as well. And then basically just a better experience, right? So,
Yeah, I think that's a very, great things that you have told. Like making your dashboards, your data more accessible, getting insights more accessible, and doing all these kind of analysis that you said, right? Maybe a competitive analysis, pricing, with competitive pricing and analysis, it's really easy, right? So that has been one of the use case, for example, as you did text to SQL and adoption. And do you think like every company will just convert into a chatbot kind of thing, where do you just convert it to go and just ask questions and get that back, or how do you think that evolving?
I think that's a good question. It also depends on how you're using it and integrating it within your application, right? I do think that the experience matters a lot. So let me
Yeah.
explain this, right? So when you're working in one window, right, and you're asking, hey, give me the products which were priced higher than my competitors, the bot is always going to give you 10 to 20 for performance things, right? You're not going to be
Mm.
like, oh, I'm going to give you a list of like a million products, right? It's never going to happen. It's going to be a sample of what the products are.
Yeah, please.
So yes, you can have these quick data insights, but if you were doing an entire analysis on the entire data set, that probably would not be possible, right? I think the second one is accuracy. There's a lot of research out there for text to SQL. How do people do it
Yeah.
right? You have to somehow kind of couple it with some sort of semantic layer to an extent, right? I can't just tell like, hey, LLM, go to all my tables in this data set, in this schema, and like now give me all of them. Never going to work. It never work for us, right? So we had to do this context, maybe these golden data set approaches where
Yes.
we gave it to a specific context in a way, which is a specific tables, so that the agent can understand and then kind of get the accurate answers, right? So I think it just depends on the nature of the query the user has, right? If it's a detailed analysis, I don't see a chatbot being useful, right? Sure, it can for quick data insights, but I see this like while you're working, I just want to, I want to understand which were the products. Okay, maybe I want to create a deck, blah, 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 like, or I want to be able to see that the recommendations given by a tool, are they correct? So let me just quickly ask some questions to my data, right? So again, it evolves, right? Maybe people chatbot interface is so powerful where you can do all of the stuff that you would have done in like, Spark or anything. It's just, I don't know if that's going to happen. But what I mean is like the nature of the query and the data task
Yeah.
matters.
But I think I'm seeing this to be really powerful, getting the correct insights really fast. And, that saves a lot of time and time equal to dollars, and that helps you to take that decision really fast. With pricing competitive and analysis, which, the decision makers might be thinking of crunching data, and that really helps a lot.
And it's very easy, right? So maybe let me ask you a question, right? So as you all see, you guys have an evaluation tool. I don't know what is the
Yeah.
most like text to SQL might be an evaluation that you all get asked for, but what context do you guys see that in, and like the scale at which you see it?
XSQL is one of the disruptors, one of the biggest disruptors that we have seen. So just think about giving that to all the teams, kind of marketing teams, sales teams, to get out that data that is just, lying down in the DBs. That you need a data analytics, a guy who needs a lot of contextual information about that. And people are like hired in all sort of teams doing that. But um, the people who actually are very versed with the data, they know what they want, right? And so just asking, okay, you know what? Let's say it's a sales company. Okay, which is the best customer, which type of customer that I need to go right now. I need to call right now, which I missed, or getting that hot leads, for example, pricing. Getting the dashboards ready, getting those insights, reaching to the right customers really fast, reaching to the right information really fast. It's actually revolutionizing the data that has been sitting just over there, and then just making sense out of it, right? So we have been hearing about these data lakes and everything, which is like storing petabyte of the data, but you need some kind of algorithm to make sense out of it, right? So for me, we have seen that as the first obvious use case that every company is kind of, using right now. And I think it's gonna be very big. So think in that terms of having Google for their whole company, but very specific, and ask a specific, or just chat GPT for all your company needs. But really smart, getting that data crunched out. So that's I would say, it's gonna be the next thing. And also, as you said, it's not just gonna be just one chat interface that people are making. It's more like combining both at the same time, right? Not obviously, as I said, like making the data sense that it's very important. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you all been, sorry, I'll ask one more question. I know this is a podcast, but have you all seen the scale? So, like, you asked me the question of how do you, what kind of way do you envision this kind of evolving, right? Like, and to me, it depends on the query and the context in which it's being used, right? So the amount of data an interface would return would always be less than, what you would be able to get if you just went and queried, say, the data lake. So when y'all have, what have you all seen with your customers from a scale in terms of the data that they're trying to figure out, they evaluate uh, from a data agent perspective?
It's huge. It's like time series data, seconds time series data that have been doing. So as you were saying, right? Uh, the AI is very deterministic. It cannot like just give that all the data and will just make sense out of it. What we are seeing as there are multi-layer of agentic systems which are involved. For example, okay, you know what? Let's start with something deterministic. Let's have deterministic queries, but with non-deterministic calls, which is making data out of that. But we have been talking to few companies which have like seconds time series data, right? Just think about, let's say, trading every seconds data, and then they want to analyze that, or hard disk data, or data in big uh, training centers or data centers. So they want to analyze all sort of those things. They want to analyze. So I have seen this scale really large. So we were talking to few Fortune 50 companies, and also they have massive data in their stores. I think few of you, they might be your customer as well. So so they each of their team needs to have this tool that they were relying on, and then become very super productive if they are doing that. We have seen like that going in petabyte of data, to be frank. But AI right now cannot have that, so they are like making multi-layer system, which AI, like the large language model, kind of making few decisions, right? Strategically decisions, but having few deterministic steps in between,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it doesn't
yeah, yeah.
go just
And
hallucinate.
you have to control it with determinism to
Yeah,
understand it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Maybe you have any insights on that. So maybe you can share that
I'll
as well.
talk to you about how, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so let's talk a little bit about multi-agent systems, right? So like I think that we've talked a lot about multi-agent systems, but we don't know how to do them. And I know that's a loaded statement, but there's a lot of trial and error, right? Like to me, we talk about orchestration, etc. But I think what it comes down to, in my eyes, is like the separation of concerns, right? Like
Yeah,
what do you want your agents to do? What is your architecture? Are you using an agent as a tool? Do you want the agent to transfer it to the agent? Do you want those two agents to behave differently with the user? Right? And all of that is something that, I mean, everyone's learning, right? It is a lot of trial and
yeah,
error. I do think that from a multi-agent perspective, we have to kind of just make sure that it isn't just uh, so what I'm trying to get at is it's not just related to one, it's not just related to the LLM, the model, it's the entire ecosystem around it, right? It's like which tools are you calling, what examples are you using, etc., etc. But from a multi-agent standpoint, the architecture is also super important. And so, and how you're integrating that within the actual application also makes sense, right? So for us, the reason, so I said separation of concerns, right? And I say that from a very specific example from a modularity. Reliability is important. We understand that. We need to figure out how to kind of get that better. Yes, agent as tool, agent to agent transfer, that matters on the reliability perspective, flow, all of that, right? I think there people talk about that quite a bit, but I think from a separation of concerns and modularity perspective, for us, we've been like, hey, I don't want to always call our main agent to just get to the data agent, right? It just doesn't make sense because I want to be able to use the data agent in different parts of our experience within our tool. And so it's about that modularity lens from an engineering perspective that I don't think we've figured out yet because we think about it, reliability plays a part in that too. But I went on a rant, but I feel like multi-agent systems is still something we're figuring out, honestly. And we have pillars that we kind of think about when we think about that, but modularity is not something I've actually heard from, and not from just like a it from an engineering perspective, So
Yeah, I think modularity makes a lot of sense. It's like we have these different services in our subscription software, right? So where we have, okay, you know what, the service does do this, or this code does do this, and then also like agent came along. To be frank, I see right now these LLMs as kind of so very dumb way of explaining it, but kind of fancy funnels, right? So where you don't need to write those if and else in the system, it will make sense out of the thing and it will just spit out all the things. So having that code separation of concern is very important. Uh, and how do you see these blocks coming along, right? So there are like now retrieval, planning, memory, and all they are all like very early stage. And like early stage means they haven't just there for 1 year, and there's no things like self-reflection and all these blocks, right? Maybe like multi-agent scenario is I would say it's a bigger block, but let's talk about the smaller blocks, right? So how do you guys go along architecturing these building blocks?
Yeah, I mean, for us, when we talk about the building blocks, I think it's been very it's been kind of all over the place. So again, we started with pillars, right? Our pillars was we want to be able to produce the right things for a user. We want transparency. And when I think of transparency, the concept is the same, which is like if you're going to take action, if you're going to ask the agent to take action, you're going to ask the agent, you want to be able to confirm from the user that, this is what you want, right? So from a data agent, the way we think of transparency is we are giving back what the data agent actually returned, which is like, this is what I did, this is what I grouped it by. Because you can ask, hey, what is, give me the top performing products, and what is performing can be very subjective, right? So we've thought of transparency. So transparency is the second one, right? There's accuracy, which I spoke about. Then there is modularity, which I've been harping about, which is like we need to, from an engineering perspective, understand separation because we understand a lot about microservices architecture, but I don't think that can be just applied to what we do to agents because there is the reliability aspect that like kind of fits into that, right? And so we think about it in these 3 to 4 different ways from an architecture system, right? But then and then, for each of these pillars, you're like, how do I get to that point? Right. Which is, hey, for reliability, you need to have evals. How are you doing evals on a more periodic basis, right? For transparency, you need to make sure that the agent understands clearly, hey, defines clearly, like, hey, this was a problem. This is what we kind of broke it down to, gives an output for each step. So the agent understands how it actually got to that. Right. So I, I think for us, it's more around, and this comes down to problem solving and what we initially talked about, which is like, how are you thinking of the problem? How are you to make sure that you are getting the experience to that user, and what tools do you need to be able to use for that? Right? Because you can have multiple different tools for every different pillar, but I think we think about everything in terms of pillars. So
Yeah. I think you're a great problem solver again, because that's a great trait because you don't see technology as just a, thing that you need to use it, but it's a kind of way of solving a complex problem, right? Yeah, that's great.
right. Yeah. How are you breaking it down? Because at the end of the day, you can't just be like, oh, I want to take this to the production. Like, how are you going to do it? What are the different things you need to think of? Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. Very important question, like how do you test this complex multi-agent systems?
Yeah, man. I'll be very honest. We started with wipe testing. I think my head of AI keeps using this term and I hate it, but I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
Um, we did, right? And let's be very honest, everyone was initially, right? And we are trying to get to a point where we aren't doing that, right? And obviously we're talking to people like you guys, but also um there is internal tools that we're building, right? So from a age so when I think of text to SQL, right, there are different ways when we think of evaluation, right? So there is, the flow of agents, like what is the flow that you're going to have in your multi-agent system? Are you calling the right tools? And then you have some stuff like text to SQL, right? Even in text to SQL, you can think of it in 3 different ways, right? Are you doing syntactical, but it has its pros and cons? Are you doing it based on execution? Are you doing based on like an explain of the SQL, like an execution graph or something, right? So I think for us, it's about which frameworks to use out there. Because if you look at Google has like three different frameworks, right? What are you using for what? It's not, there are a lot of tools out in the market, I'll be very honest. So it's about what external tools do you want to build? And then what are your internal um, pipelines that you're building, right? Because for us, there's obviously, from a reliability standpoint, this is super important, right? And so we are into the lights of you guys, but there's also internal pipelines that we're building so that we can understand, hallucination is hard, but I think the accuracy aspect of it is important because building this, knowledge base or example store, whatever you want to call it, doesn't always it's not only coming from the engineer, right? The engineer is figuring out how to architect the system. The actual thing is coming from the business side of the organization, right? So it's how taking that, how are you synthesizing? So I'm not giving you like a specific answer because it's all in the air, but it is about just there's just a lot of things we need to think of. And so we're kind of in that process of doing that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you mentioned, like maybe we can pivot to something different now. You mentioned transparency and building trust right there in the agent, right? Uh, and especially that's in price, right? Because you're making a financial decision. Okay, you know what? How do you guys arrive to this pricing, or or let's say when you're comparing few pricing, how do you you guys arrive to that conclusion that this is good, this is not good, right? So how do you guys build that inherently to the systems to explain, those to your customers?
Yeah. So, when you think of transparency and you think about it in terms of predictive AI and then you think of it in terms of Gen AI, I think the actual platform is the same, which is how does a person get trust on a system? It is, if you're taking a problem, you're breaking it down into multiple pieces and you're letting the user know how you arrived to the answer, right? That is basic concept of being able to add trust or transparency. I mean, adding transparency to a system, right? I mean, from a predictive standpoint, we did that from a modeling aspect, right? I told you we have like a non-black box model, which helps kind of what percent of lift can come from every parameter. We do that. We show it to our users. And apart from that, we also have like the business rules, etc. And so we can kind of show them, hey, these were the different rules with a different weightage, and this is how you came to your exact price, right? So we give them that transparency of stuff, right? From a Gen AI perspective, I think it's different in terms of, it's different in terms of what you're trying to do, but the concept is the same, which is I give you a complex question. I want to see it broken down. I want to see exactly what you're going to do. Right. And that exactly needs to make sense to me. You're not going to be like, I'm going to take all this X tool and I'm going to, okay, I don't know what this tool is. Right. So it's about explaining what you're going to do. And then, and then showing not the output for each part, but just asking for, hey, I went and now I understand that you want products last week which were priced higher than the competitor. These are the products. Does this look okay? Yes, perfect. Now let's go to the next stage. This is how I got the products. Okay, now I'm like, okay, these are the prices you wanted to change. Does the strategy sound good? Yes. Okay, great. You give me a thumbs up. Now I'm going to show you what that data is going to look like when you change it. You're like, okay, this makes sense. Maybe this doesn't make sense. Let me go back. Let's go iterate. And now this is the final thing. So you're always asking for kind of like a, acceptance from the user before you're doing something big. I think the part of transparency, that's how we think about it, right? Which is, at the end of the day, it's like breaking a problem down into small pieces and showing them how you got to an answer. That is the key, right?
Yeah.
So
You mentioned that you guys don't have black box model, but as you move towards more of these Gen AI models, right? Maybe open source, those you guys don't have trained for a lot of times. Maybe you guys train some SLMs, right? So that's inherently like black box, and probably and more things will go towards that, right? So how are you guys thinking to open that black box and wrap around those explanations around it?
so yeah. I mean, I think about it in the same way that I said it, which is I don't know if the user really cares about
Mm.
what is internally in the model. What they do care about is why they got a recommendation,
Right.
right? And what data was used as an input for that recommendation so that they can trust
Yeah.
output. So for us, it is how do we get a user to trust the data that is being sent back from our data agent? You tell the user, hey, this is what we did. This is what your data is based on, i.e., we went and looked at all of the stores within this zone and we used these filters to figure it out. And now this is a sample of your data. Does this look right to you? Do you want another sample? Like you can ask those questions. So the user's like, okay, maybe that makes sense, right? And then you go to every step and then you kind of show them what the output of that step is. So I know everyone talks about transparency from a black box. No, we're basically asking the LLM to basically say. So it's just very easy to just say, hey, explain what you did. Just tell me what you did, right? And then
Yeah.
we use that and we show that and then a little bit of the planning as well. But I do think that as we take this agentic thing into like production and have beta customers, we're going to have a lot more questions around it. But at least from a data agent perspective, we've had a lot of feedback from customers and that's really helped them.
Yeah. You already have a lot of, these feedbacks that how what customer questions might ask because your models are already there, right? So you guys maybe already know that how to, reframe what kind of customer feedback might come. So you guys can maybe, you know, prepare for that from starting. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I think from a customer feedback perspective, it's also just like how are you taking the questions that they're asking, which yes, so we get it from, our internal teams and them, but also when they ask questions where the agent is like, I don't know what you're talking about. We try to kind of get those anonymized questions and kind of add that to our example set, basically.
Awesome. Are you guys getting, regularity heater as well from let's say there were a lot of frameworks that are coming now, right? For example, there is now EU AI Act, there are US frameworks also coming up. So how are you guys looking out for that?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, yeah, because I mean, so we've been doing AI, so I think it's a pro and con, right? So we've been doing AI for the last 20 years. So when this EU AI Act came out, we got a lot of questions from a lot of our clients, right? Which is like, oh, you need to kind of be able to, where are we using AI? And we were like, hey, we've been doing that for 15 years, right? AI in a different context, right? So I think for us, I think about it as internal and external, right? When we think about internal, it's documentation. It's how you're actually thinking about the system, how you're maintaining separation of concerns, how you're monitoring it to kind of make sure that you have no, drift or et cetera, right? So that's something that internally you need to do, right? And then from an external standpoint, I think um, it's more about telling a user. So like again, the transparency aspect, which I've kind of now talked about quite a bit, it is making sure that the user one understands that these are AI recommendations, right? To making sure that you're giving them the transparency so that they can one trust it, but they also now know how that is coming about, right? So I I do think that we were, I think, well positioned to do some of it already because we were already doing it and we got a lot of those questions. And some of it is new, right? Which is how do you think of transparency in the agentic way? I think we've gotten a lot of questions around, you know, we maintain data isolation for all clients. We have to, right? And so like, how do you separate logs? Like, what are you training a model? Like I think people still think of training in terms of the traditional training, like, okay, prompt engineering versus fine tuning is different. And so like I think that aspect of it is still being education that we need to do with our clients, right? But I do think it is about maintaining the right internal documentation tools and then externally making it clear to our clients when they are recommendations, when they are AI generated recommendations, and then the transparency aspect of it.
Got it. But I think a lot of guys are asking, being asked that question, and I've seen like people not being clear about how they are going to tackle it. Some I've seen like, okay, let it come, let's see, or and maybe customers are not asking a lot of those questions. But I think for your case, that's not the thing. Probably you guys are still prepared.
I mean, but
Yeah,
we also don't, right? These apps change pretty quickly. Like there are lots of new things that are coming out, so we need to keep
yeah.
up with it. But I think that transparency aspect has always been
Mm.
something that worked with, and so that's helped us kind of deal with some of the new stuff. So
Yeah. And this field is also, evolving very fast, right? And you might have seen this evolve like super fast in terms of how we used to apply AI. Now everyone's talking about AI application. Okay, use this, use that. And even the execs all through the company are very excited and pouring into it. So what is your, personal excitement about AI, or maybe the, quotient about AI in the next coming 12 to 8 months?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so let's see, right? So for me, I think there are two things. One is it like agent to agent communication, right? I I do see this future agent ecosystem where they're communicating. Now, I people can be like, "Oh, Akriti, that's really far off," but I do think there is a power in me being able
Yeah.
to talk to another agent and getting all of the information that I need. And we need to figure out how the data transfer, etc., would be. But I do think that there is a powerful aspect to that. Now, obviously, we have a lot of things we need to figure out, but everyone's been talking about internal agents and like multi agents. But I do think that would be very interesting. And I think the second one, which we talked about, I do think that we've talked about agents, agentic applications, maybe multi agent systems. But like seriously, how do they look in production? How we have some here and there examples, but seriously seeing the everyday companies getting value out of it, building it, I do think that 12 to 18 months, at least we'll see some really, good success examples where people can just follow suit, right? So that is going to be interesting as well. So
Yeah. I personally also very excited about this multi, agent to agent thing
I was very
because,
relying on that. Yeah.
right. So it's like company, maybe it's not just about like internally company building it, but just think about like we had like APIs calling each other back in operations and getting that. Maybe there's other company who has built this awesome agent. Maybe, we built something and they are like getting the transfers of data in between each other, what they want, and then they're presenting the results, right? Maybe inside your team as well, like, okay, you know what, this team made something and then we can, integrate with this agent and something like that. But that's I don't know how will that pan out, but it sounded really
Yeah, me
interesting.
too, right? But it's interesting to kind of just monitor that, right? Because I would hope that when we have a pricing agent out in the market, there are other agents like, maybe scraper agents for competitor pricing for peeps that we could integrate with. Like, and, that is a different, and you can be like, oh, but, yeah, is that you could integrate with. So I agree with that, but I am excited to see what that would look like, right? Because there is a big automation that it would do. So
With all these, even so many exciting things, I see there are a lot of big gaps in engineering practices as well. So there's a lot of confusion. Okay, how do I do this? How do I do evals? Evals are the most important parts, or as you said, like building blocks, see them as the building blocks. So, what do you see as currently like the biggest building block right now in engineering practice for GenAI?
the biggest gap.
Yeah.
Okay, um, so I think for me, it's a couple things, right? So one is, and I think I kind of spoke about this. This
Yeah.
is something that me and my head of AI keep talking. His name is Alex, by the way, guys. So he and I, when we prompt engineer, right, to an extent, you're basically saying that you're going to get a lot of these examples and you're going to kind of have the LLM understand that, and that's going to help you kind of automate some of the stuff, right? Now, those examples, like we said, a lot of it comes from the business side, right? But you have your engineers today building the systems. I don't think that tight coupling or that process of how you get that business rich data into an LLM by companies, I mean into your agentic system by companies have it's an established process. I do think that people are struggling with it. And because you're like, oh, I am going to base it on whatever the engineer thinks it is. But then that's how your agentic system would, apart from the other tools, etc., you give some determinism. That's how your basic LLM starts reacting. Right? And we saw that a little bit with our conversational analytics and RAG when we didn't have other tools that we were helping it kind of get to a better answer. So I do think that there's some gap there. I don't know if people have solved it. I would love to know if you know how people are kind of navigating that today. But that is one thing. And then the second one is like, and I come at it from an engineering lens, and I still don't know if people talk enough about how you're integrating this within your current SaaS application, right? You're not always going to be replacing your entire SaaS application. Yes, people say, hey, agents are the death of SaaS. Yeah, maybe eventually. I don't disagree with that. But like, what does that look in the interim for companies that aren't your purely agentic? You have a SaaS application that is getting you revenue, but how are you integrating that from an engineering standpoint? I think, people talk about it here and there, but I don't know if that is something that people have figured out yet. So
Yeah. And has it happened with you, so you're coming from, let's say, engineering background, and as you were saying, right? So something that you unlearned, right? Or you taught yourself, oh, okay, you know what? Okay, because this is now more like a, probabilistic era that kind of for engineering starting, where you say, okay, this was the most engineering fundamental that I had, but it's not been applicable over here. So are you seeing those things now?
yeah,
Something like
man.
that?
I think I mean, my biggest thing was the amount of arguments I've had with my AI team around, guys, this needs to be 5 agents because if this is how I understand, because I am putting my microservices brain on there, and that does not work. And we had a lot of reliability issues from an agent to agent transfer perspective. And again, I say separation of concerns, and that's why I say modularity is very important. But I don't know if modularity is the same way that I would think of microservices. Maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. But I think to me, that was one of the biggest things because we had hours and hours of arguments, and I was just like, dude, what are we doing here? Right? What are we doing here? And the only way to do it is to test it out and see if it works. And what I realized is the separation of concerns when we think of an engineering microservice might not be the same as an agent, which is very fair and makes sense, intuitive sense. But until you see that not happening, you're like, oh, I didn't realize that, right? And so it is different, but what is it, right? And because it could be that it's some aspect of a not a monolithic, but just like some not a very microservices architecture. It's somewhere in the middle, right? And I just don't know what that is. So I think that's something that I didn't have to unlearn, but I just was like, wait a second, maybe I'm not thinking about this quite right.
Hmm. Makes
And what
sense.
about you? Is there something that you've had to unlearn?
Uh, I think how these systems works, right? It's not at all, deterministic in practice. And how do you maybe test these systems? So we train a lot of models as well, but how do you train these systems at scale? And scaling practices also differ, how engineering practices, kind of a little same, but it differed a little, and how so for me, I think prompt engineering, it's kind of very unintuitive in a lot of sense. That's the one thing I truly want to, maybe automate.
I
uh,
actually, very good point. I think a lot of the people that I've talked to and the way yeah,
yeah.
it isn't like you would think this is the right thing to do, but yeah.
Correct. But we have seen like magics if you're kind of prompting it correctly. So that's I want to automate, but kind of like if you have very good prompters, maybe I don't think like LLM will get all your context at once, what they're trying to do. So maybe you need to have a new way of writing the software, and that is kind of like, okay, what do you want this LLM to do specifically, right? I'm writing that down, maybe like how you write your softwares, right? Okay, do this, do that, and then do that, but in a very clear and concise way. That is kind of like unlearning and learning for me. A lot of times, okay, you know what? This is quite funny. This works, but this doesn't work. So, for me, that's quite of, unlearn and unlearn kind of process. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think from the prompt engineering side, I think that is the fact that you said it's unintuitive is like kind of hitting the head on the nail, right? Like that is, but people like, oh, just like let's just prompt engineer. I'm just like, I don't think it's that easy, man. Like,
Yeah.
as in like to begin with. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think talking to you was great over here, and the conversation was very fluid. I think so. We now have a very different, section of
Okay.
this podcast is where we just rapid fire few questions,
Okay.
right?
Awesome. This
From
reminds me
little
of
little.
coffee with Karan. This is just not on that couch, but yeah,
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think probably some of the writers that we have it's are inspired from that.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So one thing that engineering estimate when building for production,
Engineers underestimate while building for.
underestimate while building for production. Yeah,
I think it's in my thing, right? AI, not, I mean, like from an AI, predictive AI perspective, it's our Gen AI. I mean, like we still to get to that scale. It's the scalability. I honestly think that we underestimate that. I don't know if you want me to give a thing, but like scalability for us, we've had to go and redo a lot of different things. And I understand scale changes, but I do think that mostly I've seen, and me as well, underestimate what we have to build for. So
yeah. It's your favorite tool or library that you keep on using.
yes, I know. I actually really like Lovable. I use
Okay.
Lovable a decent amount. I think it is very cool to build site projects, and actually I like the reliability that tool has, and then they've been doing a lot of updates, etc. So yeah, have you used Lovable?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of brainstorming sessions. How do you want the things? And my engineering teams, just love that. So I think my designers also love that for when they're brainstorming of the want and all the
It's
things. I
good,
think,
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. One Gen trend that you're very bullish about, and when one or a trend that you see will just die in 1 or 2 months.
Yeah, so I don't okay, let me try to be not controversial. So I think that when people think about fine tuning versus prompt engineering, I just don't know if there's a known boundary or threshold right now. Like, I think when they started, everyone's like, oh, let's fine tune and let's fine tune. And I don't know if I've still seen a reason for someone to go to fine tuning unless it is super specific, right? And again, what can you do with an abundance of examples? And that's the thing where I don't know if I'm bullish about, but I don't know if I agree with a lot, like agree with like all like let's just go and fine tune. And I think that's where maybe yeah, I don't see eye to eye with a lot of people. But that's one thing. I don't know if I'm bullish about it, but I definitely feel like that's different from what people generally say in the market. So, and then what was the second question you asked? Sorry.
I think that you see fading away. You know. One trend that is, going trending out there, but you see like it's just very bad. It
It's
won't work.
very so I do think we need to think about what are we building agents for, right? Like we are trying to build agents for a lot of different things, and like I don't know if there's a universal. So again, this is not me saying agents are not a thing. I'm saying that agents are a thing. I'm just saying the way we're using agents for everything, which is very interesting to me because I don't think there's a universal accepted definition of what agents are, right? There isn't one.
Yeah,
So right now I, I just am like, okay, let's go use an agent for this and for agent for that. And I do think that there needs to be a why we're building it, what are we going to get out of it, who's using it, what is the ROI, right? And so I I, I don't think this is like, oh, this is going to feel like I feel like we need to be kind of
yeah,
structured in the way of why we're building agents. Because I
yeah.
think agents are super powerful, but like how we go about building them is something that I would think. Yeah.
The most funny thing that we have seen, in production breaking in AI.
The funny thing,
Yeah,
oh man. So I don't know if this is funny or this is just sad, but this is like the most common thing I've seen too, at least with our things, is like when we had all these models and we were using some of these, like you said, not the open source, these third party models. Um, People changing not the model version, but something about the model under the hood, which was changing the way, and that's why where you would be like, oh, evaluations within your tool would be great, so you can catch this. But the idea, the part that I'm trying to get at is something under the hood of the model changing. Obviously, me as a consumer does not know that, and that directly affects my production. And it is it. it breaks it to an extent by not like breaking it from an engineering perspective, but just how I use it. And so that is one thing that I would say. I don't know if it's funny or sad, but I'm just like, shit, well, how is this happening right now? So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Like, what's the worst nightmare in AI? It's like a model hallucination or data drift.
Uh, so I think for me it is it's these small invisible hallucinations, right? So what I've noticed as we built our multi-agent systems is, there are these hallucinations which are very small, very tiny, you don't come to know, but then when you have a multi-agent system, it compounds.
Yeah,
And this compounding hallucination to me is my nightmare because you don't catch it, right? And it's not easy to catch it. Yeah, you need to figure out how to catch it, but you don't catch it. And I've seen these compounding errors in the multi-agent systems. Yeah, if you had one agent, maybe
yeah,
that might be the case. But I've seen these invisible, these minute hallucinations, however you want, which compounds the error. So yeah.
yeah. Maybe I've seen in just three or four prompts and it just compounds. Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
what was the question again? What I was supposed to do again?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's been that's my, and I don't think it's a very in your face thing, right? It is a small thing that kind of then compounds. But yeah.
yeah. I think, yeah, Aakriti. So this one has been like great session, one of the best. I would say it was very great to have you talk to you. Yeah,
Thank you for inviting me. It was really fun too. Hopefully, I didn't say something super controversial, but
no, no, nothing at all.
cool.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for this and for this delightful section. And any closing thoughts that you have that you want to share?
Um, no, I feel like, we've been building quite a few things in the Revionics side. We're pretty excited about where the market is going. We're pretty excited with the agentic era. And, I do think that I personally am going to be looking at the market from an A2A perspective, etc. But yeah, I don't have any closing thoughts. Just super excited for where we're going, just given that we've been in this field for the last 10 years and now it's kind of taken this other turn. So yeah,
Yeah, thanks, Aakriti, for joining us today. Thank you, guys. We'll be back with another great episode. Thank you, guys. Stay tuned. Happy learning. Bye.
thanks. Bye.